Welcome to the Strength Students Podcast. I'm your co-host, Steve Carty.
And I'm your other co-host, Nick Scopoletti.
And we're here today with Mike Fahey.
How you doing?
What's up, Mike? We're talking to Mike Fahey. He's cooking up a pretty dope documentary right now. And it's the release date's pending. We're not gonna shoot out a release date, but I'm sure a lot of you have seen the previews for Westside vs. the World, right? That's
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Westside vs. the World is about Louie Simmons and Westside. So, give us a little background on you, Mike. Like, as far as strength and conditioning, like, how did you get into strength and conditioning? How is it a passion of yours?
I got into it because my dad is a maniac. He's back in the early '90s. He was a stockbroker by day and was a semi-professional middle linebacker by evening.
Oh, shit.
Damn.
Yeah, age 37.
Damn.
Oh, my God.
But he had always been into strength and for the most part into bodybuilding. He's 60 now, so he's, older generation. And it had always intrigued him. He always tried to, learn everything that he could, but this is back pre-internet. And so it was mainly just, through kind of bodybuilding magazines and stuff that you would get at the supermarket. And he hurt his back at one point. He had always had reoccurring back injuries, and like a congenital condition. So his back was always nagging him. And he read just an offhand article from a bodybuilder one day. I want to say that it was Jimmy Seitzer or one of those guys who, one of the older guys who kind of part-time would stop by Westside every now and then. And he referenced, that bodybuilder in the article referenced Louie and referenced the reverse hyper. So sight unseen, my dad just took it from, a sentence-long description in the middle of this article saying the reverse hyper fixed my back. So this is like 94. They had just made the reverse hyper commercially available, and my dad bought one without knowing what it even was, set it up in the garage. It came with a little tape. The time I'm a kid, I'm just running around in the backyard. I don't give a shit. And, playing in the woods and whatever you do in Florida. But my dad gets into it. It comes with a tape, and the tape's got, this little 5'5" kind of yoked up hobbit figure with a nasally voice. By the time he had no idea who Louie really was, he just, this guy talks kind of funny. He watches the tape. That's how you do it. Okay, tosses the tape. And then he realizes that he's never going to look like Arnold. In your mid-30s is a good time to figure that out. So he starts going, well, if I can't, look big and pretty, then maybe I can be strong. And he comes across Powerlifting USA eventually. And he starts to, get into Louie's articles. And they're just different than everything else that's in there. I don't know if you've ever gone through some of those old versions.
I've read Powerlifting USA. I read it back in high school, like 04, 05, I think. So
yeah.
I've read it, yeah.
Yeah, so this is like, probably like 96, 97-ish. So such classic articles as, the percent method and stuff were coming out. It was just different. Everyone else is talking about just different variations of linear Western periodization. Here's Louie talking about this radically different stuff. And my dad starts to put two and two together and go, this is that little dude who was on that tape. And he just becomes, and my dad happens to kind of talk and communicate in a similar manner to Louie. Like, he's all over the place. He's real excited. He gets going 100 miles a minute, and he doesn't tell you when he's switching subjects. That would come in handy later on, because it was just bred into me that, like, oh, that's how some people talk. Okay, like, it doesn't throw me like it does some people. But so from there, he got really into it. He went and got all the tapes. And in my house, it was, the Chicago Bears, the Cubs, the Bulls, and Westside. And as I started to get a little older, it was more and more Westside and less of the others. We would talk about, we talk more about Chuck Vogelpohl than Scottie Pippen.
Wow.
And once Michael retired, then it was just all Westside all the time.
Right.
And again, this is like late 90s. So this is, it's an obscure sport. No one cares. And no one knows what the hell my dad's talking about. But then I start throwing shot put and discus. And in 99, as like a 12-year-old, I ended up going up to Cleveland for the AU track and field nationals or whatever. And my dad, this is like the last vacation he ever took. And that was back in 99. He goes, he hates leaving the house. He's a recluse, a hermit, just antisocial. And he got all excited and was like, well, if I chaperone, because I only competed for one day. I was just throwing shot put, and it was like one of the last events. And he goes, well, if I sign up to chaperone this children's track team, maybe I can drive down to Columbus and we can go to Westside.
Oh, shit.
And so that's what we did. And the rest of the team would all go to the track and drink Kool-Aid and have fun and hang out. And for 2 or 3 days, my dad drove me, and I'm 12. I had, I grew up with a crazy gym, like, in the house, and the gym just took over like cancer. It just consumed the rest of the house. I was talking to Dave Tate at the Arnold about this, and about how much of the gym has, because Elite is where we got most of our equipment.
Yeah.
How, it's like a D1 facility just in the garage, and then kettlebells in the dining room. My dad got out of the stock market, I think, so that he could put back machines and battling ropes and things in his office in the house.
Damn. Commitment.
My parents had a big, nice house, and he just destroyed everything with gym equipment. Tanked the value of the house. But and same with the backyard. Had a tennis court, tore it up with sleds and strongman yokes and tractor tires and stuff. And my dad did all this just pretty much for him, and and maybe a dozen people have ever at one time kind of cycled in and out of that place. But we show up to Westside, and I'm throwing shot put and stuff at the time. I've done a couple, like, I did a short little, like, 6-week children's weightlifting thing at, like, Florida State down the street, where they just cycled you from one machine to the next for, you do 2 sets of 20 on 8 different machines, and none of it really made any sense, like, from a practical manner. But you just were on the machines, and you pulled the pin out and whatever. But I knew that, like, this was something that my dad did. I knew a lot of the words and the vernacular, but I didn't really have any knowledge of what it all kind of came together to be. And we show up to Westside, and this is back when it's over on Dimmerst Road in the little strip mall. Not in the best part of town. Not a place anyone with any sanity would think, like, oh, this is a cool place to go. And the windows are all blacked out and stuff. And you walk in, and my dad was kind of nervous getting out of the car, which was weird to see for him. And we walk in, the morning group is squatting. This is back when Westside got, like, few enough visitors that they would encourage you to come, like, during the morning group. Not like today where, they're going to try and kind of get you in after the real bulk of the work and the sort of monsters do their thing.
Right.
And we walk in, and I can remember, you know, like it was yesterday. I think Dave Tate is taking a squat. They're doing speed squats, and Louie comes walking out of the back. And I think Dave had said hi to us and stuff and kind of let us in. And, you know, it was also weird that my dad had brought me. I'm a kid. This is not a place like for kids. I don't really understand. I mean, I'd been to gyms and stuff before. So when my dad says, hey, we're going to go 2 hours down the road to this gym, I'm thinking we're going to come out to like a Gold's, and there's going to be bodybuilders and little stringer tees and stuff, and everyone's going to have tans and gelled hair and stuff. And no, it's you know, everyone looks rough. Everyone is fine. Chuck Vogelpool was sitting on a bench off to my left. It was just the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. And Dave lets us in. I'm completely overwhelmed by everything. And Louie comes walking out of the back, and he's just put on his gear, and he's got like Gold Bond, and he's just shoving Gold Bond like down his crotch. This is at the time when Louie, he's making his comeback in, you know, 99, and he had dyed like his goatee red.
Oh
so he's got,
God.
You know, he's 5'5", and I'm 6'3" now. So at the time, I was probably about his height. So I'm looking at this grown-ass man, like eye to eye. He's a whole lot, you know, he's bulky, but he's not really bigger than me. And I'm used to seeing like football players and stuff. Like I'm thinking, you know, these guys are all going to be gigantic. And most of them were. But Louie comes walking out, and he walks out, and he's, you know, got that high nasally voice, and he's, hey, what's going on? And he pulls it. My dad goes, you know, this is my son, Michael, and he kind of pushes me forward. Next thing I know, Louie, the same hand that I just watched, as he says, you know, like, my nuts are itching. He pulls this hand out and just grabs mine and starts shaking it. And like Gold Bond and stuff is still left on it. He hops under the bar and starts squatting. And, you know, and for the next, you know, hour or so, like we kind of watched them go, and then they had a couple other visitors and some new guys, and they said to my dad, like, why don't you hop in, you know? And that made his, you know, that was his dream. And so he got to go through get put through a couple workouts at Westside where like the guys he's squatting against are all half his size and half his age and just kicking his ass. And then at the end, Louie and Dave are talking to my dad, and Dave is kind of doing the translator thing. And they pull me outside into the parking lot, and they're having my dad drag the sled and talking about GPP stuff. And my dad, of course, is asking, you know, well, what can I do for my son? And before I know it, they pull a medicine ball out, and they had me throwing this medicine ball. And I don't know how many throws I end up doing, but I just remember the rest of the week I'm sore, and I end up throwing like a good 6.5 feet short of where I had been in practice coming into the week. So I just completely ruined my shot at nationals.
Perfect.
But I mean, I'm 12. It doesn't really matter. And then from there, my dad, he gets to talking to Dave some more. And the next thing I know, in summer 2000, Dave comes down and does an offsite seminar for Elite FTS, which was like, you know, fledgling at the time. It was just sort of an idea.
Yeah. And
he comes and does a seminar in my dad's facility, which is, again, his garage. It was a 2-car garage, but, you know, it's like a 2-car garage with a monolift and, you know,
that's so sick.
Everything that you could want.
Dope. That's dope.
And people came in from all over the South because at the time, like you either had to go up to Ohio to talk to Louie, or catch one of Dave's seminars. So it had a big enough draw. And the next summer, Dave came back and did it. And then, in 2004, he came back and did it again. And by that time I had been using, pretty much after we left, I started kind of, you know, for a year or two, kind of dabbled in it, would do, you know, maybe 1 or 2 workouts a week. I'm still a kid. And then I get into high school, and I played football. And my freshman year, I played 4 plays on JV, and they were all in one game. It was a freshman-only game, and 2 of the plays were because someone's helmet broke, and the coach just turned and said, I need somebody, and I ran out without asking, like, if it could be me.
Hell yeah.
And I thought that I was, good and stuff, and I thought, I'm better than these kids at least. Like, it's not like my team was great. And so I just, like, after that told my dad, like, I want to work out every day. Started, every day come home from school, drag sled, reverse hypers, then go right into my max effort, dynamic effort work, do my like I would be working out from like 3 to 7 every day.
Damn.
And I came back the next year with the idea of I'm going to make them have to play me on JV. And we had summer workouts and stuff, and I put on like a lot of weight. I went from being like 160 all the way up to like 180, 190. And they separated the JV and the varsity squads to go to like that first day of 2-a-days. And I just instinctively went off with the JV, and one of the varsity coaches ran me down and said, like, no, you're not with them anymore. So my whole goal had been, I want to get playing time on JV, and I ended up being a 3-year starter on varsity.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I still at that point didn't really like understand football. But just being stronger, and then just the confidence that you get from being stronger is what kind of carried me through.
Well, yeah, and you had, Louie Simmons nutsack juice all up in your body, so that had to help too.
Yeah. I still haven't washed the hand.
Dude, I wouldn't either. Shit.
Dude, now you telling that story, now I get it. Because at the Arnold, Jim McDonald said, like, this guy was made to make this movie. And I was like, yeah, I'm sure he is. And now you hear that story, and I go, yeah,
oh, fuck yeah.
You were literally fucking born to make this movie. It's insane. Yeah. Oh, my God. I did not know any of that. I'm blown away. Podcast over. I'm done.
So, Mike, how talk a little about like how so that was kind of the strength background of things. Did you get into like powerlifting or compete at all in anything, or was it just football and track?
No, it was just football and track, and a brief stint with trying to get every rebound in basketball and being like a high school Ben Wallace who couldn't make a layup. Yeah, competitive powerlifting, that wasn't really a thing, like in my sort of region, and Tallahassee in the early 2000s, it would be a task to go find any sort of meet. And again, this is at that point in time, Elite FTS and their forums and stuff were just starting to ramp up. But single and multiply were like the only offerings at the time. And it was weird, like no one else on my football team did it, except for eventually by the time I was a senior, like 3 or 4 guys trained with me and stuff. But the idea of competing in powerlifting never crossed my mind. And it's something like I still haven't done. I'm just a dude who likes to be strong. I like to be athletic, and I like to know that like if some zombie apocalypse type shit goes down, I've got some explosion and some strength to be able to do some things.
Word. And so how about like filmmaking? So obviously you've done the documentary at Westside. How did you get into the filmmaking side of things?
Well, that all started. I'd always been very artistic. I'd always been into drawing. I made beats when I was in high school.
Hell yeah.
I sold beats like through college.
Oh shit.
Yeah. Had
damn.
a booth and stuff that I built in my apartment. Rappers and singers from around the town would come over and record with me, and eventually I picked a camera in college and started. When I did music stuff, I felt like I was a pretender. It was really hard. I still had some dope beats. it would take me weeks to make one that I felt like I can play this for people. And then I had friends who were producers, and they would walk in and just sit down and go, what do I want to do today? And something magical would come out. But I noticed that when I picked up a camera, I had, sort of just a more natural eye for it and framing. And it just seemed like a language that I kind of spoke on a level already. But anyways, my senior year in high school, I was getting recruited for football. I was really burnt out from lifting every day after practice, playing. I mean, for like 3 years, basically every single day after school, for at least 3 hours, I was either lifting or practicing. And so I ran into one of my friends who had gone to Louisville, who was a year or two older than me. And he came back to visit our high school like on spring break, and he had torn up his knee. And he just seemed really depressed and was complaining about all the weight that they had made him gain. And at the time, coaches were talking to me and saying, well, you're 240, but if you got up to 280, and I was just like, I'm sweating and breathing hard, like walking up the flight of stairs at school, like 280. And then they're like, and you could eventually carry 300. And I was like, this is not what I want to do. And I told my parents, I was like, I think I want to do film school. And I kind of talked my way into FSU's film school. Then they did some restructuring, and 6 months later, I get a notice in the mail that I've been kicked out of film school. Briefly thought about a fallback career of, because I turned down like Cornell and stuff to play football, and like good academic schools, because they didn't offer anything in film, or if they did, they wouldn't let me do film and sports. And same with track. So I kind of pushed all sports and everything off to the side and said, I'm going to be an artist. I'm going to do film. And then that kind of got snatched away from me. And I really had this existential moment where I thought, like, I'm going to end up playing like for a local arena league team for like $bucks a week. Yeah. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. And then luckily I found this media production course and got into that, and had just a really awesome professor who was also kind of like Louie in that kind of quirky guru sense. And he gave me a lot of advice and stuff. And I end up getting an internship on a documentary coming out of college in LA on a documentary called Forks Over Knives. And within 6 or 7 months, I go from being intern on that to just kind of working my way up the ladder. And before I knew it, I was the editor on that. Damn. And the editor who I'd replaced, when I got to LA, everyone thought that it was weird and like this novel thing that I had this sports background. Because like, I don't know if you've been to LA and especially hung out with like industry people, but they're all like tiny. They're little tiny people. Like the average guy's 5'9", 120. Like, so I was this hulking giant in the background at 6'3" and like 220, and I would wear my Westside hoodie all the time. And so everyone kind of knew me as this like weird jock ogre thing. And as this guy's on his way out the door to take a new job, the new job happened to be at NFL Network. And he said to me, like, when this ends, give me a call, because you'd be perfect for NFL Network. And he says, none of the editors over there have ever played football. So I work on Forks Over Knives for another year or so. And that's another documentary that ended up taking like 3 years to come out. Yeah. So that's kind of the norm for all these people on Instagram who are just hounding me about when's it going to come out. Takes a while.
They don't get it, man. They want it now.
Yeah. So everyone thinks it's like this little YouTube video, and I'm like, no, like I come from working on big, like, $500,000 documentaries that a team of people invest years of their life into, and then we put it up on a big screen, and that screen goes around the country and ends up and it ends up being a big thing. It doesn't look like it when you're doing it. Like, you look like just a crazy person. So I go from Forks Over Knives, which is a weird, like, vegan diet movie, to NFL Network, to then some stuff with TLC and Travel Channel, work on a show called Food Paradise for a couple seasons, just traveling around the country eating, disgustingly unhealthy but delicious food.
Sounds terrible. That was weird.
I'm glad I could witness that.
You're welcome, Mike.
That was adorable. And it's all good. So I end up going from, when I went out to LA, I thought I was going to be a writer. I'm too impatient to write, or at least at the time I was. Now I was 22 back then. Now being 30, I would much rather be writing. But fell into this documentary and saw how making a documentary, was like writing in reverse. You found the story in what was already there versus writing where you tell a story. But I found that kind of worked with the way that I thought and the way that I told stories and identifying and extracting things out of what to most people seem, just minuscule and like nothing's there.
Word. Cool. Well, so we're gonna take a quick break here before we transition more into like Westside stuff. However, I want to hear this fucking Scientology story.
Okay. So Scientology is a big thing out in LA. It's not something that I had ever heard of before I moved there. But I was working on a show called Secret Societies of Hollywood. And I was just doing a lot of camera work for it. And they'd just give me a list of stuff to do every day. And they'd send me out. So I'd stop by the office, pick up the camera, and then go out into the world. And a couple blocks away from the office was this place called Scientology Celebrity Center. And it's over there. I want to say it's on like Franklin, between like Franklin and Hollywood. And it's got it's like a castle basically with these like really high walls. And I'm walking through the neighborhood and I've got a PA with me, an assistant who's like literally, I think he'd come from Nebraska 2 days earlier. And at that point, he was still just every 5 seconds looking around and going, oh my God, I've seen that before. And that was on this show. And that was on this. And I'm just like kind of sick of it. But I'm walking with the camera. And as we're walking up, I'd heard some stuff about Scientology. And they told me, be careful. This was my second time having basically an assault incident while shooting for this one company. The other was in Kansas City at a pizza joint.
Oh my God.
Yeah, got jumped by some roadies. That's another story. Never dropped the camera in either of these situations. Never dropped the camera. But so we're walking down the street and Scientology is it's pretty terrifying and cultish in how they handle themselves. As I'm walking down the street, I notice across the street, because I've got a tripod with a camera on it, and across the street there's a guy walking just in step with us, and he's staring at us. And every time you look over, he turns his head up and just acts like he's just taking a stroll, but it happens to be lockstep with you. If you stop, he stops. If you go, he goes. If you sprint a couple steps, he sprints a couple steps.
Holy shit.
And then you get to the next block, and there's another guy waiting, across the crosswalk. And he's got an earpiece in, and they're all dressed wearing these just single-color polo shirts, tucked into khaki shorts. Like they look like they're about to go hit the golf course or something. And they're all very clean cut. But they've all got the little security earpieces in. And they don't look like all the other tourists. Like they don't look like they're dressed in the right, dressed for the weather, dressed for the time. And they're all staring at you. And every block, someone new kind of like comes up, and one of them will every once in a while will ask what you're doing. And we would say like, oh, we're shooting a commercial for Upright Citizens Brigade because they're in the same neighborhood. There's just a place that I knew. So I said, yeah, we're doing a story on them and the neighborhood development. And so I'd shoot some stuff facing the camera away from the celebrity center. And then when those guys kind of backed off, I'd swing the camera back around and get the B-roll of that, because that's what I was there to do. And before I know it, a couple guys on Segways come up and start questioning us and start trying to grab the camera and stuff and telling me, oh, if you just come inside with us. Just come behind the giant, like, ivy-covered stone wall and walk inside this haunted castle-looking place and let us question you. And
oh my God,
like they told us, like, under no circumstances do you step foot on their property. Like, stay out, don't be baited in. Like, we'll never see you again. People go missing that way, and they've got lawyers. Like, it's a scary thing. Somebody's got to come after me for this now. But
sorry.
Starts.
We have a big Scientology fan base.
They're everywhere, man. But so after we get a few shots, I'm like, this is enough harassment. We're gonna leave. And so I just pick up, without saying a word, I just scoop up the tripod, throw it over my shoulder. Camera still running, just pointing up out towards the sky. And we walk a couple blocks, and we're getting to the end of their like big compound, and there's this delivery driveway. And it's a three-way stop at the light. And so we wait for the light to turn green and get the little walk arrow and stuff. And as we go to walk, this car that was running like maybe 50, 60 feet down the driveway pointed out. There's a woman in the car. She guns it. And I'm like talking as I'm walking and telling the kid something. He jumps out of the way, and I go over the hood with the camera and just sprawl out across the ground. And dude on the curb, like on the Segway, who was following us, is just standing there. And another dude is standing on the other side of the crosswalk. And this woman gets out. And she goes, "Oh my God, are you hurt? Are you okay?" And I'm just like kind of cataloging what the hell's just happened. And I look around and I feel myself and go, yeah, I'm okay. I checked the camera. There's no, I kind of cradled it as I went down, fell on the football type deal. And as soon as I say that I'm okay, her face just goes blank. Like all the emotion goes away. And she goes, "I don't even know what I was doing." And she starts walking backwards and gets back into the car, puts it in reverse, and just reverses out and stops right where she had been sitting and doesn't even turn the car off. Yeah. And I get up and I look around at all these people who are all security standing on these corners, and no one has any human expression in their faces. Oh, they're all just standing there staring. And the poor PA from Nebraska just goes, "What the fuck is this?" And run. And so we take off running like across down the street, not even on the sidewalk. We're trying to get around them. So I run kind of down the midline of the street, and we were parked up at a supermarket 2 blocks away. We get back into the car, and I think he regretted his entire choice of career, and I think he ended up moving back to Nebraska at the end of the week. Yeah. It was just like, I don't know what Hollywood is, but I don't want it.
Yeah, that's the most psycho shit I've ever heard of.
Oh my God.
That's insane, dude. You could make a movie about that experience.
That's the kind of, when you work in film and you work in documentaries, because there are no rules and everybody's shady, you get a ton of stories like that. I forget about that one all the time. Like, that's like number 5 on my go-to list.
Oh,
like,
fuck.
That's number 5?
Yeah.
God
shit.
damn.
We're gonna have to do a separate episode with like all like top 5 or top 10. Like, holy shit.
Yeah.
All right. So on that note, we're gonna take a quick break. When we get back, we'll talk to Mike a little more about the filming of Westside vs. the World, what it was like at Westside and with Louie Simmons and all that. So we're gonna take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Want more of the Strength Students podcast? Go check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Also, make sure you leave us a 5-star review on iTunes and on Stitcher. Stitcher, I just met her.
Welcome back, everybody. We're back here with Mike Fahey, the director of Westside vs. the World. Director, editor, creator. What title do you prefer with that?
Director is fine. I want to make like very clear. I also have a directing partner, Carlos Carvalho.
Okay.
So
cool.
the two of us kind of have done this whole thing.
Word. Okay. So now what we want to talk to you about, Mike, is just like how this all came about, man. Like the experience filming there, being at Westside filming. But first and foremost, what we were kind of just talking about a couple minutes ago here, like they're not very open to like, hey, come in here, film us. We're Westside. Like, how the fuck did you get in there? Like,
yeah, because I know they had their like cassette tape series that they had back in the day that you could buy. And when I learned about Westside Barbell in college, I want to say it was like 2009 or 2010. I'm reading PDFs. Like, there's fucking everybody has YouTube footage. Everyone has something you could watch. And Westside kind of does now a little bit, but not really. Not really. They're kind of hidden.
Not really.
It's like someone filming them watching the cassette of Westside. There's no like actual YouTube footage. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's Westside is for everybody knows about Westside, and yet you can't find anything in Westside. You can find little, like, a dude shows up and pulls out a phone and has a 2-minute conversation with Louie, and you never really see the beginning and you never really see the end. It's just these tiny little fragmented clips. It is really its own closed-off little world. But so, in a lot of that I kind of knew, again, from following Westside and from knowing Dave Tate, and I had heard a lot of stories about behind the scenes, and I knew going in that, it's this amazing story. Like the stories from that place are just batshit crazy. And then the science and methods and stuff are so impactful. I'm not the first person who's ever wanted to do this. I'm not the first person who's ever tried. So that being said, like, yeah, it's incredibly difficult. There's a few minutes of Westside stuff back in Bigger, Stronger, Faster with Chris Bell. Yeah. And back probably like about 5 years ago now, I was at Travel Channel. I just started working there. I think I was in like my first season, working on Food Paradise. And this woman who had just left the same production company, who had worked with me on Forks Over Knives, she had just gotten a development. She became the director of development at another bigger reality show company. And she remembered just all these stories and stuff that I told when they would ask me, like, hey, why does that dog on your shirt have balls? And we'd start talking Westside. Yeah, these are the kind of questions I would get. And, it sounded just crazy. And this is back on Forks Over Knives. So I'm in like an office full of vegans who have, they're not into, certainly not into powerlifting.
Big powerlifters, I hear.
Those vegans, man.
Yeah. Well, like my dad now is vegan. It can be done. It's harder, but it can be done.
Dope.
But they thought that it was so strange. And so they would ask me these stories all the time. And it's like 2 years later, and this woman calls me and says, hey, I'm in charge of finding new show ideas. And she says, what was that Jim used to tell me about? And so we start talking about Westside, and she says, oh, that's crazy. What if I sign you and assign you to put together a show on Westside? And I was like, well, that would be great theoretically, but they would never in a million years agree to that. If I call up and say, hey, Louie, I want to put you on, Spike, he's going to tell me to get the fuck out, and I'm not going to be able to ever talk to them again. And at the time, I wasn't talking to them. But in my back pocket, I kind of was always like, if I could make this happen, I would want to. I don't think that it can be done. But if I ever figure out a way to do it, I want to be able to tell that story. And to get paid for 1 week to set up one phone call where I get told no, and then lose my deal with the production company and lose my deal with Westside all in one day isn't worth the one paycheck I would get. But so then she starts asking me, well, what about if, a powerlifting, are there other gyms like this? So at the time I start looking around, and within, a couple minutes of searching online, I find that Super Training had tried to do a reality show, and I get hooked up with Jim McD. And we talk a couple times on the phone. A couple months later, I end up going up to Sacramento to shoot something else. And I meet up with Jim McD, and we had dinner and stuff, and we start talking. And he asked me if I was still trying to find like a powerlifting thing to do. And I said, yeah, but the problem, and in listening to the problems that they had doing a reality series, I said, the problem is, because I had seen the same things when I was talking to companies about how they would want to shoot it. I talked to this company, and I said, well, how would you want to shoot it? And they said, well, it'd all be centered around these meets. And I go, okay, have you ever been to a powerlifting meet? Like, not real fun.
No meets are that exciting. Like weightlifting or power, they're kind of boring, to be honest.
Yeah. Unless you want to go back to like the WPO. If you got a time machine, and you can go back to like
that's different.
The 03 Arnold or something, like that might be cool. But they say, well, we want to, and in the first meet, maybe someone succeeds or they fail and blah, blah, blah. And I go, well, how many lifters would it be? And they said, we'd need like 3 or 4. And, think of it kind of like swamp people, like you need your different boats, you need your different lifters. I said, all right, well, so you would do like one lifter, one meet, one episode, and then another one. And they go, no, they'd all be competing head to head every episode. And I said, and how many episodes? And I said, we'd need to do at least 6 to begin with, which is like the sort of smallest kind of a half season, feeler deal. And I said, so what would be the second episode? And they go, oh, meet 2. I go, well, so wait, you want to do meet every episode? I said, and they were like, yeah. And I said, what's the production schedule on this? And they said, well, we would want to shoot about an episode every week, some weeks. And I was just like, you're going to kill these guys. Or they're going to kill you. Like, that's what's... This isn't something that's, like, physically, humanly possible.
Yeah, right.
Like, that's not how the body works. And so talking to Jim McD, I was saying, but the more and more they made me think about it by teasing me with this idea, I started to reverse engineer it and go, what would the conditions need to be like to be able to work with the powerlifters? And I said, it's hard to replicate this in a reality show format, but you could easily do it as a documentary. And I was like, well, and documentaries are more fun anyways. They're fun in the sense that you get to like really live with the subject matter for an extended period of time versus shows you crank it out and then you move on to the next thing. Because if nothing happens, you still got to make an episode that week. You still get paid that week too, which is cool, versus a documentary where if you get delayed 6 months, well, ramen noodles are just your thing. But so I'm talking to Jim McD, and I say, at the time, in 2004, 2005, I had kind of stopped really lifting. So I was like, I'm in film school now. I got to put all that athlete shit behind me. I'm an artist now. Like, I'm a regular person. And, you know, like, and I'm still in North Florida and 6'3", like 240, walking around. People go like, oh, you on the football team? I'm like, no, I'm in the film school. And then I go out to LA, and finally, you know, like out in LA, cool kids don't play sports. So it comes up like, oh, you played football in high school? And I go, well, look at me. Like some coach eventually should ask me if I want to play. Like, I'm huge. Yeah, everybody. Didn't you play some sport? And they go, no one played sports in my high school. We just, you know, like hated on shit on the internet. Like, I don't, but we troll at an amateur level. But so talking to Jim McD, I was going, you know, like, I'm talking to him and he's saying, well, you know, lifting's really changed. Like, this is now like 2012-ish. And he's like, you know, Raw is big. I was like, well, what do people think about Westside? And he's like, man, a lot of people kind of hate Westside now. I was like, really? Like, this is so weird. I call my dad because he's still following powerlifting. Powerlifting USA is like right at the end of its run. And, you know, but Bigger, Stronger, Faster had kind of gotten all the gym bros into it. And CrossFit's getting big. And so, you know, you have this huge influx of new people who have no idea the history. And then you have like this older generation who, you know, the ones who are still around, like, they don't want to go to Raw, you know, for the most part. Like, you don't want to lift less weight. And you know, you got to lifting when you were 40 and, you know, beyond because of gear. So like, there's this huge disconnect. And I was just like, this is fascinating. Like, number one, people kind of care about powerlifting. This is weird. And I start kind of doing the math, and I'm like, you know, the only point of reference I have that I'm familiar enough with is Westside. And that's also how I trained when I was younger, was conjugate. And that was the only thing that I knew. I didn't really understand linear and Western periodization, traditional periodization models and stuff. And I was just like, I don't understand why you would do that. Like, doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
And I was like, that's also not what like high-end athletes in any other sports do. Why would you? All science is still science. Like, why would you? Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Not going to fight that battle. Except for a tad bit in the movie. We're trying to bridge the gap there. But I'm talking to Jim, and he's talking to me about, he tells me a little bit about what he had heard from Chris about putting together Bigger, Stronger, Faster. And he's giving me some advice, and he's just kind of updating me on where the sport's gone. And his advice was like, you know, look elsewhere. Like, you don't want to do this with Westside. Is, you know, Louie's too difficult to deal with and stuff. And you know, Westside, they're too closed off. They're too kind of stuck in what they do. Everyone's kind of moved on. And everything that he was telling me, I was like, yeah, this is all accurate, but that's also what makes like a really compelling central sort of storyline. And then I keep working through it in my head, and keep trying to figure out how I could do it. And I'm talking to my dad, and as soon as I brought it up to my dad, like, he wouldn't let it go. So it's maybe like, that's like January 2012 that we have this conversation. In 2014, I'm working on waiting every day to hear when I'm going to get the start date for this documentary on Bobby Bowden, former FSU coach. Yeah. And so like, and I'm from Tallahassee, and like, I lived through that story too.
Right.
And I know like former players and stuff. So I'm all excited about that. That's like my dream project. And then the funding goes away for that, just sort of inexplicably falls apart. And that's, again, 2014, I got offered the to work on that in 2013. That movie just came out in January. So again, 3+ years. This shit takes a lot of time. But my dad calls me up on July 2nd, 2014, and he says, man, I was just talking to Louie. He would still call Westside. Because he's still training, and he trained a few people and stuff. And again, he's a maniac. And so he was still calling Westside. And he said, I just got off the phone with Louie today. You've got a meeting tomorrow. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, you got a meeting with Louie. And I'm like, whoa, like, you're telling me I've got to meet? What is it? What about? And he goes, well, about doing a documentary on him. I was like, okay, see, this is the conversation we need to have first. So, because I'm not prepared. I'm thinking I'm about to go down to Florida like any day now to start shooting such a thing. And sort of luckily, that thing fell apart. And my dad kind of forced me into it. And it forced me into taking the steps to initiate with Westside. And this is also like, he calls me at like 11 my time in California. So I'm still in LA at this point. And he says, you got a meeting with Louie. I said, well, what time? And he says, 9. Because it's right when the morning group's gotten done. Columbus is in Eastern Standard Time. So 9 your time, Eastern, or my time, Western. It's a 3-hour difference. And it's already 11 West Coast time. And he goes, oh. Oh, damn it. And so, like, I don't even, like, sleep. I just stay up and get a phone call at 6 in the morning. And it's, hi, this is Louie Simmons. Hey, Louie, what's going on? He goes, your dad said I should talk to you. Okay. So what do you want to do? And I said, well, I guess I want to talk to you about making a documentary on you. And he goes, let me just stop. No. Now, what do you want to do? And I go, okay, well, my idea had been, and I start talking to him, and I try and make it like obvious, like, hey, I've grown up kind of knowing about you, and knowing about, I just binged on like watching interviews and stuff with him on YouTube and little speaking clips and stuff, just trying to refresh myself and mesh that with what I had remembered from the old VHS tapes. And just trying to communicate to him that, like, I'm not like some other dude from LA who just like read a short little paragraph about you on some bodybuilding.com article and is going, oh, this sounds like a cool story. I'll take one swing at it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I move on, and whatever, I wasted your time. Who cares? But we end up talking for about 45 minutes. And at the end of the conversation, he goes, well, Mike, I got to go, but no. And then he says, well, where do you live? And I said, well, I'm out in Pasadena. I'm in California, just outside of LA. And he goes, I'm going to put you on the phone with my assistant. And she, how tall are you? I said 6'3". And he goes, how much do you weigh? And I was like, 215. I mean, mind you, at the time, like, I'd just gotten off of doing, I think, a second vegan movie. And so I'm like, 215. And he goes, no. You need to be at least 275. I go, Louie, I'm not a competitor. Like, I don't, like, at the time, at this time, I had not touched a barbell in probably 2 years. Wow. Like, I had just been doing some kettlebell stuff and running and, like, been doing kettlebells and barefoot running. That's where I was in my life. And he says, you need to be at least 275. And I go, what the fuck are you talking about, old man? And, and then so that's July 3rd. I go to the beach the next day with my roommates, and I had slept like all through the day and stuff, and they all worked out in Hollywood. None of them really had athletic backgrounds. And, we're sitting on the beach, and I just kind of like lift my head up off the beach towel, which is also a bad idea because I think, as you can tell, like, I don't have any pigment in my skin. I mean, like, I'm glowing pink because my skin's just translucent.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Irish?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Irish. No protection from the sun and a giant ass head.
Yep.
But so I kind of say to them, like, I think I'm trying to do a powerlifting documentary now. And they're just like, that's a weird thing to say, and ignore me. And 2 days later, I get this big ass box, like at 7:45 in the morning. Someone knocks on our door, and I walk to the front of the house, and there's this giant box, and I open it up, and it's like every book that Louie's written, methods at the time, the jump book, all little squat, bench, deadlift, little manuals and stuff, and then a bunch of shirts, and they're all size 2X. Like, he wasn't gonna let me wear the L that I fit. He was like, "No, you're gonna gain some fucking weight."
Jesus Christ.
But, you know, like, he had just told me no, and so I'm looking at this box, and I go, like, okay, that wasn't a no. Like, that was a challenge. And so we go back to the beach, like, that weekend, and I bring all the books, and I just, you know, as everyone else plays and does whatever, I just sit on the beach and read all day. And I just read through everything. I call Louie back, and he answers by saying, you know, still no, but what do you think? And so we start talking about some stuff, and I had, a month or two earlier, I had pulled my hamstring. So I start telling him, like, what an idiot I feel like, because I know that I shouldn't have done that. And this is clearly just that I have a deficiency with my hamstrings now, that, you know, I've let them atrophy and stuff. And he you know, kind of snaps his fingers and clicks his tongue and says, you know, it tells me that I'm on the right path and stuff with that. But I just try and keep him on the line and keep just trying to, like, any way that I can endear him or make him fascinated at all to want to meet me in any regard. I don't know if that part worked. But he tells me he still doesn't think that it's something he wants to do. But now I've gotten him off of no.
Yeah.
And I go, okay, well, you know, I'm gonna do some more research and stuff. I'm still working on other stuff. So I'm gonna go do this shoot for a couple weeks, and is it all right if I just give you a call back, like, next month? And so we call again, and at the end of this call's now like 2 hours long. And he says, maybe. And then, like, the next month, we talk again, and it's like 2 hours and 15 minutes, and now I have to go. And as y'all might be able to tell right now, I'll talk forever and I'll loiter. So I go, like, Louie, I got to go. And he goes, well, you know, when are we going to talk again? Like, so now he's expecting me. And I go, well, Louie, are we going to do this or not? He says, well, you know, I'm leaning towards yes, but I still have some reservations. I said, you know, Louie, what I do is I talk at you until you relent. I will talk you into submission. That's what my job is. Like, that's what producing is just talking. Like, really talking people into doing things that maybe they wouldn't otherwise do. But I was like, you're going to keep, you know, presenting me with small problems. I'm going to keep figuring out ways that we can deal with that. But I'm eventually going to get this to a place that feels comfortable enough with you. So just, why don't we skip the bullshit and, like, let's just try. And if we get further into it and you say, you know, this isn't what I want to do, fuck off, then it's, you know, just my time wasted. But, like, let's deal with the problems as they happen. And I had no idea at that time how many problems there would be and how difficult a process that would really be. 'Cause you assume that, like, people like publicity and people like to be on, you know, some manner of being on camera, that people respond in some sense to some level of flattery. And Louie does not. That man does not care. He has a different logic system than everybody else. And that kind of, you know, like, you had to acknowledge that. And I think that's what we did differently that other people didn't. And then meanwhile, while I was, so that's 2014. And I keep in touch with Louie, and he gives me phone numbers of other people to talk to. And so I start rounding up other people and going, and they all ask, well, what does Louie say? And I said, Louie said I can go forward with this, and they're like, well, if Louie will do it, then we'll do it. And, so I did a bunch of phone interviews, just trying to get a lay of the land. And I told them, like, this is going to be a long time before I come back to you. I want you to forget everything that we ever talked about. But I just need to know, like, because powerlifting is also this weird sport where, like, none of it is recorded. There's no real history on any of this. Like, you're going off of YouTube clips of somebody saying that they lifted this at this, like back in 92, I was doing this and Jesse Kellum came to a meet and we did it. Like, none of it's really published anywhere. Maybe Powerlifting or Powerlifting Watch or whatever has some recordings of the last few years, but not the 80s, not the 90s,
Right.
So I had to do a lot of research and just talking to people, which I don't like to do because it can spoil the interviews sometimes. And then it was like a full year. It was early 2015 where I went down to interview AJ Roberts, and then Louie says to me, he calls me while I'm at AJ Roberts' place down in San Diego, and he says, there's this guy here who wants to do what you're doing. And I was like, what? Wait, what are you talking? Like, there's another guy there? Like, does he have a camera? I'll be on the next flight. And he's like, said, no, like, y'all should look into working together. And he said, this guy does a lot of camera work and you've edited, right? And I was like, well, yeah, that's kind of what my credits up to this point have mainly been in. And that ended up being Carlos Carvalho, who was, he was like UFC, he was working with Matt Brown as his jiu-jitsu coach. I think in like 2013, I want to say, he won like some European championship, sort of fighting as a Westside fighter. But he's getting older. He's, nearing 40, and he had a film school background back in Brazil. But so he came at it as a fighter, and he had been, in and around Westside for a couple of years. He didn't know the background of lifting and sort of the methods and everything. He knew the people like in person, and he just knew at like coming there as a fighter how different that place was. So where I had this like sort of from far away kind of aerial perspective of Westside in this larger scope, he knew Westside up close, but he didn't know where it had kind of come from. So our points of view kind of added to one another, and our skill sets, his being more camera driven background and mine being more of an editing and post background, they also meshed together. And, like, again, these are huge endeavors. You can't do them alone. And he was on the ground there. So at that point, the two of us started working together. Other people came in with cameras. Other people got kicked out. Other people kind of soured Louie on the idea of cameras being there, and everybody got shut down for a while. And we were able to just, kind of walk that line of filming a guy who doesn't want to be filmed. Interviewing a guy who doesn't want to be famous.
Right.
And trying to kind of bait him with the carrot of, if we do our job right, think of how many, young athletes will maybe hear your message. Think of how many people, if what you've got is the truth, then, I'm of the belief that like the truth will triumph over everything else. So if your methods are correct and what you've got is the truth, then putting it out there and maybe letting someone else kind of tell that story, because Louie communicates weirdly. And again, he talks and, kind of conducts himself a lot like my dad. So, going in there, I was like, this is like having a conversation with my dad and then turning around to other people and telling them what my dad was talking about. And I've done that in my life. So I was like, I think I can do this. And then in September of 2015, I got in there for the first time. And I think Tom Barry, who works with the fighters and handles a lot of the office operations and stuff, he said, like my third or fourth day there, I think he said that they had put bets on how long I'd last. And I said, well, what was the winning bet? Or, what's the longest bet? And he says, well, I would have won. And I said, how long did you bet? And he said, a day and a half. And I'd been there for 2 weeks. And so he was just the whole time, like, thought we were just fools who, like, eventually this whole thing was going to get shut down. And there were, along the way, there were Facebook posts and stuff, and they threatened to shut us down. And, other people along the way said, well, if you're ever looking for another powerlifting documentary, maybe I'd be a good thing. And I was like, that's exactly what, like, I don't want. I wanted the challenge of a guy who didn't want it. And I wanted to really talk to somebody who, he'll turn 70 later this year, I believe. He's a radically different person. And I've talked to people from all walks of life and stuff, powerlifting is like a new thing that I've gotten back in touch with. But he's one of the most unique people I've ever interacted with, just period. And so even if I wasn't such a big powerlifting fan, he's a great, like, sort of subject to tackle. And it's hard as hell because he is so closed off and he is so, mysterious, and his life is bizarre.
Yeah, it is their own little world there, man. It's a crazy little like hermit's palace over there. So, we don't want to give too much away. Obviously, the film's going to be coming out, but just kind of give an idea of maybe like what was like one of your favorite moments filming there, and like, what's like the biggest thing you took away from that whole experience of being there at Westside?
Really, this is sort of outside of the film, but it's something that I think about a lot because whenever I tell people, and I've done things in the past like talk classes and talk to younger filmmakers about the process of filmmaking, which really is, this sort of Wild West industry. There aren't any rules. If it works, then it works. And if it works for you, it doesn't mean that it'll work for you in the future. It doesn't mean it'll work for anyone else. But if you got it to work, then it's acceptable. So it's a realm where you really have to be passionate, and you really have to be persistent, and you really have to, be willing to endure to get to the end of it. And one of the things that I saw with Westside, everyone assumes that like where we're at right now is where we've always been. The average sort of 21-year-old finding the sport right now, who finds it on YouTube and sees all of these different channels that each have, 100,000, 300,000 like subscribers or whatever. They all assume that like that guy has always been, they all assume just number one, that there's always been people like that. That you've always been able to point at someone and go, that's an authority, that's an authority. And the reality of it is, like, powerlifting is, it's a young sport. It's only really been formulated as sort of an organized sport since the 60s. People think it goes back hundreds of years. No, picking up heavy shit and putting it down goes back forever. Powerlifting is like a sanctioned competition, right, is very young. Yeah. So when you look at like, and then people will say to me all the time, like, well, Westside works for Multiply, but it's only, and I go like, guys, when was Multiply invented? Like when was the Westside system invented? Early 80s? When was Multiply? When did that branch off and become a thing? About a decade later. So you go, so it was working for, from 83 to like 91 before there was this big Multiply thing. So if it was working then, and then you go, guys, when did Louie start lifting? 1966. So and you go like, and who did he learn from? Bill Peanuts West and guys, there's all this history. But we assume that like the West Side of old was this sort of standalone industry, and that surely everyone read their columns and everyone knew to look to them. No, like those were just some guys doing some shit, and occasionally they'd write about it. But there was no real organizational structure. Louie through just like this passion and this force of will, wanted to talk to people and wanted to get out this stuff that he was learning. And for the vast majority of his life, the best way to learn was through conversation, was through interaction. And it was because of this, which is like a very human thing, just to talk, like what we're doing. Podcasting is a brand new thing.
Yeah.
Somebody started doing it and then was like, oh, you should hear this conversation, or you should hear this interview that I did with so-and-so. And they start passing it around. And this idea that didn't exist 10, 12 years ago now suddenly is common. And we look at, say, Mark Bell, and we go like, oh, well, Mark Bell, he must have always been here. No, he kind of like, the Strength documentary. Chris Bell kind of paved that way. He didn't have really the roadmap before him. But you look at Elite Fitness Systems, you look at, all these other guys now, whether it's, say what the Chad Wesley Smiths of the world are doing, or the Chris Duffins of the world, where they're trying to have these facilities that put out these sort of schools of thought and this knowledge. No one gave a fuck about powerlifting, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
To be doing that. There was no, there were great, no one talks about Black South World as this institution of strength, because what Louie did and what Westside did that was so different was they took this idea of being like a team and being a gym, and then suddenly making that like a place that you would go to them. And they didn't do it to make money. No one had ever made money doing it before.
Right.
And like Louie doesn't know how to use the internet. He doesn't. People like, you hear about, he gets emails and stuff printed out for him. He writes, why they post like all the handwritten notes and stuff. That's how Louie does it. And then somebody else transcribes it and types it in.
Oh my God.
This isn't, I was watching earlier, like your episode with Mark, and he talks about how he used his phone to create sort of this industry for himself. Louie didn't use the internet to do that. Louie just used like pen and paper and, picking up a phone to actually make phone calls to people and talk to them over the phone. There was never an idea that like people will be lining up to buy shirts behind it. That just kind of happened on its own. There was never an idea that competing outlets would start up. So like, even if you disagree with Louie entirely, like you have to, in some realm, you have to go like, if Louie hadn't have built Westside as this niche and this sort of self-contained, if he hadn't taken that step in the evolution of what a gym could be, just in terms of putting out information, we wouldn't have, all those other gyms. Eventually someone would have done it, but it would be so primitive by comparison.
Yeah.
And Lucas did that shit out of an insane and unrelenting passion. And by that, I mean, like, he's more one-minded or more singular-minded and driven towards one topic and focus than any other human I've ever met. Like, you know, he could wear me out in pursuing like one point, and I'm pretty stubborn and pretty dogged. And so and again, like that's not really something that we get into in the movie. But that's a point that to me, again, for what I do, where there are no real rules, you're just kind of making it up as you go and trying to make it look like you're in control. And I have to make things happen the same way by translating my passion. And to look at him in how he's been able to do that, and he's done it again without thinking, without it being a conscious process, that it's just all happened around him because he was going somewhere and enough people saw it and said, I want to go there too. That's incredible to me in like any industry. And you do see it in other industries, but like to see him up close and to see how he works and to see that like he's basically like just a classic example of someone who was decades ahead of their time. And, maybe that time for him has passed. I'm not trying to say that like he's decades still out into the future. He's ahead of the curve still on many things, but like sort of his role within pushing society forward in the game of strength and stuff. He went from being looked at, as this oddball and things when he was out ahead of everyone else, to then the rest of the world kind of caught up to him. And now you see, because of it, you see a lot. I'm in Orlando. One of the first places I came when I got to Orlando was I went to Davis Training Systems, where John Davis over there is using a lot of Westside methodology to train athletes. And then up in Atlanta, just outside of Atlanta, you've got like Explosive Mechanics. I posted some of their stuff earlier this week. Like, you have all these places that now are kind of taking what Louie did and are expanding it into newer realms. And, Westside has always worked with athletes and stuff, even to look at Shane Sweat and Laura Phelps Sweat and what they're doing over at CrossFit Conjugate and the sweatshop. Like, they took what Louie was doing, and now they're getting to the point where, being younger and kind of having a broader base, since they are more sort of in tune and out there with the world, that there's now enough people and enough minds kind of coming together and working on things that if it keeps pushing forward, the opportunities in linking all of those people together, like you can see really explosive, dynamics and gains made in science and huge explosions in numbers as the genetic pool opens up and as you get these different personalities and perspectives all now kind of using the same guiding principles. Which is another thing that like Louie talks about a lot, where, like within his books, he talks so much about introverts and extroverts. And, you can give two people the same idea and they can both understand that same idea, but they're going to be applying all of their background to it. And that's going to give you slightly different results. And one will figure something out faster than the other. And they'll each figure out and, take that in slightly different directions. And over time, you get so much experimentation, so much variance. And it doesn't really go back to your original question there, but
we could tell you're a passionate man as well, dude. You're very passionate.
Yeah, and I mean it's but to kind of further your point that you were just making, like it's Westside's kind of been this like mysterious type place, I guess, the past few years. Like it's kind of like, spoken like under the table at gyms, like, oh, do you know Westside kind of deal? And now hopefully, with like the creation of your documentary and all that, like it could now kind of take its like well-deserved center stage.
Mm-hmm. I hope if I do what I'm trying to do right, then whether whether and to what extent you agree with Westside, you will at least know about Westside.
What it is,
yeah. And if you have criticisms, your criticisms will be based on what they are and what has happened with context of history.
Word.
And you'll, hopefully understand, how the progression of the sport and of Louie and of the athletes, that it won't be so mysterious in how they came to the conclusions that they came to,
right,
and how they made the decisions that they made. Whether you agree with them or not, whether it's, multiply or box squats or anything else. I talked to Dave Tate while I was up in Columbus at the Arnold, and we were talking about some stuff, and Dave always has great just rants on what's, wrong with kind of gym culture and the internet and stuff. And he said, like everyone who, if you want to consider yourself a master on strength, you have to be able to argue both sides. And he said, today, we see so many people who they can argue against the other side, but they can't really argue against their side.
Yeah.
And again, you see that everywhere else. And as the nation has this big existential question about politics and stuff, like you see the same thing, like, what's the other side? Like, how could all these people, I guess like I'm the kind of person who I like to think. I think that most people don't really like to think, but if I can trick you through a movie into thinking, then like that's good enough for me. Like that's my goal, is incept you into having a conversation internally that you otherwise would never have had.
Word. I like that.
That's perfect.
Sweet.
That's perfect, dude.
I don't know if I've ever said that before.
Well, that's going to be a quote graphic on our social media page. So, all right, Mike, we're going to wrap it up right there, man. Real quick, I know, it's not like out yet, but whatever you want to plug as far as the documentary goes, like feel free, like, social media, where maybe the movie's going to come out, all that.
Yeah. So on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, we're at Westside Film. And follow the website, westsideversustheworld.com. And hopefully within the next week or two, we'll have like our store up. So like you can at least buy the t-shirt, which I didn't know that people would like or anything. I just was like, I got to have something to wear while I'm in Ohio, so that like when I say, "Oh yeah, I'm part of that movie," there was something identifiable with me. So great to see that I made something on my phone and people liked it. And hopefully, within the next couple months, we'll have a release date, and then we're gonna try and take it everywhere that we can. Certainly Columbus, certainly, New York and LA, a few other scattered cities. We've gotten a lot of interest and a lot of inquiries and requests for screenings from Australia to Northern Ireland and New Zealand, like 5 or 6 cities in Canada, another dozen or 2 cities across the U.S.
Cool.
So we're trying to set up a system where we can get it everywhere, and you can go see it on a big screen as it's meant to be seen, and then after that, we'll have it on DVD for people who still do that, like my dad, or streaming for the youngsters. And if you want to watch it on your phone, please do so, and take the headphones out and make everyone on the subway listen to it with you.
Hell yes.
I think the world needs to hear more like Tony Ramos just going off, preferably in mixed company, maybe around children, Up a little bit. Let's put some salt back in the world.
Yeah, let's get it. Let's get it.
I appreciate that. That's true.
And
oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Again, and everyone go follow my partner too, Carlos Carvalho. I believe his name is at Carlos Carvalho USA on Instagram. Don't want to leave him out. He's up in Ohio right now. I believe working on a sailboat.
Sweet.
Interesting.
All right, word.
A sailboat right now. So.
All right, Mike. Yeah, man. Thank you so much for joining us, and we definitely look forward to seeing that documentary.
Yeah,
We're
can't
super
wait.
pumped about it. So thanks, man. Thanks for joining us, and hope to talk to you soon.
All right, thanks.